Heckling, booing, and angry demands. Congressman Mike Flood, the latest Republican member of Congress, to face anger from voters back home. Anger over DOGE, Ukraine, and tariffs. It all went down in a rural red district of his.
My understanding that your wife had breast cancer and went through diagnosis, treatment, recovery, and is doing well. I appreciate that for you. I have a 20-year-old daughter, and I lost a sister to breast cancer. You, Mike Flood, have decided to capitulate your job of monitoring the funding of places that do research for breast cancer. I don't see how you can stomach that you did that, because you are cutting the rug out from other. You are cutting the rug out from under future scientists who might develop new treatments, new diagnoses, so that my daughter, when she's your wife's age, might not get the most up-and-coming research available to her. You are disfunding NIH, Johns Hopkins, the National Science Foundation, and you can't put that on anybody but yourself and your GOP colleagues. I would like to know how you personally stomach that decision. Thank you.
Anybody that has been through a close relative or a friend or a family member with cancer knows how deeply personal that is. And I have had that experience with my own wife. So yes, I do know what that process is like. Here's where we're at. We're at the dawn of a new presidential administration. The 119th Congress is about 60 days in. We have the Department of Government Efficiency that is looking at and is some, It is looking at the funding that's available for research, and in some cases that funding has either been identified or suspended or is on hold or has been terminated. I don't believe we're in a process today, at this moment, to say in any way that medical research funding is going away. I support medical research funding. If it is currently paused, if there is a concern, we take those up individually, and ultimately where we need to go is to a balanced budget. There's a lot of people in this room that don't support what DOGE is doing. But for the first time, we are making some progress. How can you be against a balanced budget? How can you be against a balanced budget? All right. All right.
Danny, you've seen some of these town halls, so now you're able to say what one looks like versus another. So much frustration in the auditorium where you are. What did people have to say to Congressman Flood?
In this particular town hall, Aaron, people had a lot to say to Congressman Flood, but just for some perspective, we're in Nebraska's 1st congressional district. This is a district that President Trump won by 55% of the vote. Congressman Flood actually did better than Trump back in 2024 with 60% of the vote, and yet, as you noted, as you just played, there was still quite a lot of frustration. A lot of topics covered in this room tonight: the border, tariffs, Canada, the rule of law, a lot of foreign policy as well. And while, make no mistake, there were a lot of Democrats here and folks who would not have otherwise voted for Congressman Flood or certainly President Trump, there were certainly Republicans here as well who I spoke with who said they had voted for this Republican congressman and they were still concerned about what this administration has been doing. And I'll say, Aaron, the biggest amount of boos and jeering that we heard really came with the subject of Elon Musk, with the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. A lot of people fearful that there would be cuts to the VA, also cutting of Medicare and Medicaid. Take a listen to how Congressman Flood responded to at least some of this, because he really stood by Elon Musk and DOGE.
there's a lot of people in this room that don't support what DOGE is doing. But for the first time, we are making some progress. How can you be against a balanced budget? How can you be against a balanced budget? All right. All right.
Now, Aaron, I'll say I just spoke with a congressman after this town hall. He said that he certainly will take a lot of the concerns he heard specifically about the VA back to Washington. I will note there was actually one other part of agreement that was a bit of a rare sight in this crowd. It was when Congressman Flood said he supports Ukraine. He does not feel Ukraine should give up any land to Russia, and he believes in a strong NATO. But the one thing, Aaron, is that Congressman Flood said he was glad that he went out here and did this town hall. He plans to hold at least one more this year in August in a much more Democratic area of his district in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Some people did give Flood credit for actually showing up in person to listen to their concerns, as some Republicans have canceled town halls. And he said he would continue to show up. And it wasn't just Flood facing angry voters last night. A Democrat Congressman, Glenn Ivey, hearing from frustrated constituents that his party isn't doing enough to push back against President Trump.
We are not interested in hearing that you are in the minority. We know that. We want you to show some of the backbone and strategic brilliance that Mitch McConnell would have in the minority.
Right.
We want you to show fight, and you are not fighting.
Interesting, the Democrats and Republican constituents aligning with their message. And more town halls are scheduled today. We will continue to monitor them for you. All right, over to you, John.
All right, with us now, CNN political analyst Jackie Kucinich and Mark Preston. You two friends of mine, you're much too young to remember the Tea Party situation in the town halls then, and when people flocked to yell at their members of Congress back in 2010, Mark. The question is, when does this anger that we're seeing pretty consistently here turn into more than just an airing of grievances and into a political movement?
Well, I mean, a political movement, it's starting right now, but it's not being driven necessarily by the leaders of the Democratic Party. It's being driven by the grassroots, at the bottom, and it's really just starting. Look, I've been saying this for weeks, for months now. Donald Trump will have this year to get through what he wants to get through. He's not on the ballot again. The folks who are going to have to face the consequences are the likes of the Republican Congressman Flood, who was back home yesterday, and all these other Republicans that will have to go back home in August. Really, the focus should be around July 4th. We're going to start to see this really bubble up. And then by August, you're going to see a lot of these DOGE cuts are going to take place. And by the way, they're not all just happening here in Washington, D.C. They're all spread out across the country. So that's why you're going to see these town halls turn very volatile, John.
Jackie, Mark used the word grassroots there, which again was a word that we heard back in 2010. And then it was the Democrats responding. Now it's the Republicans responding. It's not grassroots. They use the word AstroTurf. These are fake protests. These are organized leftists going in to flock these Republican town halls.
So I think time will tell, right? Republicans were able to harness the Tea Party movement and able to use it to add to their numbers. Whether Democrats will be able to harness this voter anger going into 2026, that remains to be seen. We'll have an early test in terms of the Virginia gubernatorial election, which is at the end of this year. But really, this movement has a long time to build until we get to the actual midterm elections. The other thing will be interesting to see how many primary challenges we see on the Democratic side, because as you saw in Glenn Ivey's town hall, the ire isn't just directed toward Republican this time. Democratic voters are also ticked off.
Anger, outrage, and demands for accountability. That was the scene at town halls across the country yesterday. Lawmakers from Washington State to Nebraska to Maryland facing off with frustrated constituents, pressing them on everything from DOGE to Democrats' plans to fight back. Take a listen.
What people of America see, what people of Eastern Washington see, is President Trump delivering on his promises. And so
we need to find out what Elon Musk is doing
and how we can stop it.
Would you mind telling your colleagues in Washington that when they're burning down this house, there's people still inside?
We feel that Democrats in Congress are against us. This must change, Congressman. This must change.
And joining us now is Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland. He sits on the House Appropriations and Ethics Committee. And Congressman, you held a town hall yesterday with more than 900 attendees. There was a lot of motion there. What was your takeaway, and what actions are you going to take to address your constituents' concerns?
Well, I think I was the last clip that you played there. People were angry, they're furious, really. And rightly so. I mean, they've been attacked by the Trump administration. People have been forced out of jobs that they've been doing well for sometimes decades. People on the other end of that are not getting the government services that they'd like and need to have. And for no apparent reason. So there's a lot of frustration with that. I think there's a lot of frustration, too, with the inability to stop Trump as quickly as people would like. So we talked a lot about the court cases last night, and frankly, they are going very well. I think they put the Trump administration on their heels to some extent with all of these injunctions that have been put in place, and now some orders to reinstate. I think in the latest one, 28,000 employees who were fired. But, you know, for people who, you know, the wolf is at the door, they're about to lose their house, their livelihoods are at stake. There's concern, there's anger, and there's frustration.
Certainly there's concern with DOJ and what's happening, but there was a lot of concern about Democrats not doing enough.
Yeah.
You heard that from these constituents saying that Democrats aren't fighting for them, that Democrats are being too polite. This moment in particular stuck out to me. Let's play it.
Thank you for being polite with us, but when it comes to fighting these fights, we need you to be a little bit less polite, a little bit more hell no instead of a little bit no.
Fair enough.
And there may be a time when you and other congresspeople need to do civil disobedience. You need to be arrested.
Sure.
And I will go with you. I will stand next to you and be arrested.
And I was going to ask if you were going to be willing to be arrested. But I'm going to ask you a different question.
I'd be willing to be arrested again. Yes. Yeah. I've done it before.
So you're willing to be arrested? What law were you willing to break to get arrested?
Well, that goes all the way back to South Africa and the protest that we did. The first one I did was when I was in college, and we shut down an administrative building. But
what are you willing to do? Are you willing to do something now to risk getting arrested?
Well, potentially, but I think the key is to make sure it's strategic and well done. I mean, if you look at the civil rights movement, for example, they were very strategic in how they targeted the points where they were going to conduct these protests, the demands that they made that were in connection with that. I think we have to do that here as well, too. The other part we need to make sure is it can be civil disobedience. It can be just regular protests and rallies. We've been doing a lot of those around town. But I think we need to accelerate those. But I think the key point, though, is we got to build the number of people who are participating. So we've done several of these, you know, in front of USAID or NOAA or other departments and agencies. But if you remember back to the Black Lives Matter protests, we had thousands of people coming out for those protests across the country. I think we need to build that out and make sure we're doing more with those. But in the interim, though, here in Congress, we have votes that we can have opportunities to have an impact on. Last Friday was one of those with respect to the CR. I think we missed a big opportunity there. We've got some more coming up with respect to the budget reconciliation and the like. Those are tougher because those are just simple majorities as opposed to a 60 vote, the cloture vote that you need in the Senate. But when we have these opportunities, we've got to make the most of them. And I think that's a big piece of what people were frustrated about was what happened last week.
Right. And you know, you mentioned that you've gone out in front of some of these agencies and protests. So clearly constituents are saying that's not enough. We want to see more from our Democratic leaders. They're upset. I mean, you see the historic low 29% approval rating. And you've actually said that it might be time for Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to step aside. Who should replace him?
Well, that's not my call. I'm in the House. But I mean, I think the bottom line was the frustration.
There have been calls for AOC to, you know, primary him and so forth. Would you like to
Well, I think that's 4 years away. And the point we got last night was they can't wait till 2026. They need help now. And so I think the focus needs to be on what we do now. For example, I've got a Medicaid roundtable we're going to do later today that tries to draw attention to that because we're going to have these individual votes coming up. And I think it's important for us to see if we can have an impact on those. So for example, some of the places where you've seen Republicans backing away from what Trump's doing are districts where Harris carried the majority in those districts. I think if we target those, and we are, in the DCCC and Leader Jeffries, let's focus on the districts where we can win those and get the majority back come 2026. But if we can change the votes now that are leading up to that because they're starting to be concerned about their political support, we can have an impact on these votes as they're coming through now. So I think the future is now with respect to trying to have an impact on these things. I'm all for the community protests and impact. I'm all for the courts. But we've got a job to do in Congress. And I think if we step up and get more coordinated and enhance our communications and stick together, we can get those things done.
All right, Congressman Glenn Ivey, thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
These members are back in their home districts. They're dealing with some blowback, shall you say, from some of their members. It's happening on the Democratic side. We're going to talk about that later in the show as well, but also on the Republican side about a lot of the cuts that are being pushed by Doge and Elon Musk.
How do you justify cuts to staff of the VA helping veterans, especially those with long-term care needs?
So first of all, there have been no cuts to the staff at VA as of this point.
I know you disagree with what Mr. Musk is doing. I know you disagree with the way this is rolling out, but this is the process that we are using to find waste, fraud, and abuse.
By and large, what people of America see, what people of Eastern Washington see, is President Trump delivering on his promises. And so,
do you think that this is going to change how Republicans, when they come back to town next week, how they talk about, how they deal with Elon Musk, or just brush this off?
Yeah. Look, it really depends on numbers. Like that, you showed a town hall from Spokane, Washington there, right? Which is a big city, a blue city, in a red district. So if Mr. Baumgarten, who I think is the lawmaker there that was on scene, the newly elected member of Congress, I don't know if it's first term or second, if he's reading that and says, oh, these are big numbers in Spokane, I've got a big problem, then we might see, because remember, survival instincts are going to kick in eventually for members of Congress in the United States Senate. They just have to worry about it on two fronts. One, are they going to get primaried? So if they go against the president and they go against Elon Musk, they could be perceived as not loyal. And two, they're going to look to see how much they can push it on the other side, and can they still see a path to victory? So I think that's really the challenge in the next couple of weeks, is to talking to those members and seeing how they read their districts. But a lot of them, as we know, aren't actually holding town halls.
And that's what Republican leadership said, don't have town halls
Yeah.
because they're worried about moments that we just showed on air.
That's right. And you hear a lot of Republicans essentially saying, these are Democrats who are flocking to these town halls. These aren't our voters. Our voters are still with us on this. The problem is that there is going to be real pain felt by some of these voters, in Republican voters as well, and maybe most especially if you think about what's going on with tariffs, if you think about what's going on with the VA, and also if you think about what's going to go on with the Social Security Administration, where it's going to be more difficult for people to file claims. They won't be able to use the phone initially. They'll have to go in person. This is going to cause some real upheaval for people having to travel, older people with disabilities, and so there is going to be some pain. The problem again is so much is going to be done by the time the pain possibly starts, and it's going to be very difficult to completely reverse course and undo some of the things.
I think that's one of the interesting things about it, because we saw lawmakers basically go to Elon Musk and say, hey, you need to involve us in your plans. You need to tell us what's going on. And I think in part so that they could go back to their districts and say, I can call Elon Musk. I have his phone number. I can reach out to him. You're not able to access this. Okay, let us figure it out. But at a certain point, when does that become a poison pill? Because we know that Elon Musk's approval numbers, now that we are tracking them, are lessening. And so at what point does it become impertinent to not have such a close relationship with
I'm going to guess closer to the midterm elections, perhaps. That's just a guess. You're educated guess, perhaps.